Okay, good morning. My name is John Lowen. I am the publisher of the Corridor Business Journal. On behalf of my wife, Aspen, who's the co-owner of the business, and our entire staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Economic Forecast Luncheon. I want to thank all of you for joining us. I know it's a busy day with the presidential inauguration, and I know there's another round of PPP funding that many people are anxiously applying for right now, and so we appreciate you being with us on this busy day. As many of you know, the Economic Forecast Luncheon is typically our largest event of the year. However, due to the pandemic, we are doing things a little bit differently today. We are recording live from the Coralville Marriott. Instead of addressing between 600 and 700 business and community leaders in person, which we would normally do on a normal year, there are only a handful of executives in the ballroom. We are, however, excited to share the speakers and our panelists' insights with a much larger audience online. I believe we have over 800 people tuning in virtually right now. We are taking all the necessary precautions to keep our speakers, staff, and in-person attendees safe. As you can see, maybe beside me, the speakers' chairs are at least 6 feet apart, and everyone has their own microphone, and all microphones have been disinfected earlier. What you probably can't see is that the audience chairs are also 6 feet apart. Everybody's sitting at their own table, and we've asked everybody to wear masks when they're moving around the room. We've also taken everybody's temperatures and taking additional precautions to keep everybody safe. Also, instead of traveling today, our keynote speaker will be joining us remotely via Zoom. Like many small businesses, our business model at the Corridor Business Journal has been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as I just mentioned. If you find value in this webinar and would like to support the Corridor Business Journal, really the best way is to subscribe to the weekly print or digital edition. If you are a print subscriber or a digital subscriber, you can also buy a subscription for family members or friends or colleagues. If you are joining us online, after you leave the webinar today, you will be redirected to our website, and there is also an option to make a one-time financial contribution. As you probably know, we would typically charge money to attend this event, but have provided it for free as some businesses and individuals are still experiencing severe economic hardship. So if you can make a contribution, that would be very helpful, and thank you. Okay, the agenda for today is as follows. I'm going to just say a few more words, and then we will have Todd Wishman of Bankers Trust come up and introduce our keynote speaker, Gary Huffbauer. After Gary's remarks, time permitting, we'll take some questions from you in the audience. And then we're fortunate to have Jack Evans of the Hall Perrine Foundation, who will introduce our distinguished panel and begin the panel discussion. And finally, I'll come back up and conclude the program by 1:15. You might be thinking about some specific questions that you have for either Gary or our panelists. For those of you who are joining us online, you can type your questions in the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen. If you are joining us in person, you can text your questions to 319-936-6555, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. At this time, I would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Without their financial support and input, we would not be able to host this annual event. This event is presented by Bankers Trust. They've been our partner and presenting sponsors since we started this 16 years ago. Bankers Trust is committed to serving the corridor with local decision-making and a full range of commercial and consumer banking, private banking, and wealth management services. As Iowa's largest community bank, Bankers Trust has the expertise and resources you can rely on to achieve your personal or business goals. Experience the Bankers Trust difference. We're also fortunate to have several gold level sponsors today. Comprised of 4 companies under one roof, Aman Design, Fusion Architects, Compass Commercial Services, and Q4 Real Estate, Aman Companies has the ability to take any project from site selection through move-in ready, or any one of their services may be used individually. For the past 30 years, their success has been from designing dreams and building the future throughout the corridor. And CLA exists to create opportunities for its clients, its people, and its communities through industry-focused wealth advisory, outsourcing, audit, tax, and consulting services. Whether your needs are local or abroad, CLA promises to know you and help you. And the Eastern Iowa Airport, or CID, is taking healthy travel to another level. Travel Well, a health screening program for departing passengers, launches January 25th. The program is a partnership with Mercy Medical Center and Mercy Care Business Health Solutions, and is part of the airport's multi-layered approach to help slow the spread of COVID-19. ITC Midwest provides reliable electric transmission service to the region, helping to connect generation sources and power the corridor economy. ITC's grid investments have increased the availability of renewable energy and reduced electric transmission outages by 63%. ITC Midwest, working for the greater grid. And is your business prepared for the new normal? Kirkwood Corporate Training can help your company prepare for and adapt to many of the critical business functions that rule the new normal in today's world. Contact Kirkwood today to get started at kirkwood.edu/corporate training. And Marco is one of the largest technology providers in the country. They specialize in business IT services, copier printer solutions, managed and cloud services. Let Marco's technology experts help take your business technology further. Learn more at marconet.com. And last but certainly not least, UFG Insurance. Simple solutions for complex times. 2020 was anything but simple, but as UFG celebrates 75 years of being in business in 2021, they're reminded of how strong and resilient people can be as a community and a company. Visit ufginsurance.com to learn more. Please help me give all those sponsors a quick round of applause. Okay, before we begin, I did want to mention a couple exciting things happening at the Corridor Business Journal. Beginning on February 1st, Becky Luton Gardner will be taking the helm as CBJ's new editor and chief content officer. In this role, Becky will be responsible for managing and editing the weekly newspaper, daily e-blast, and monthly podcasts. In addition, she will spearhead a number of new digital initiatives for the CBJ. Many of you probably know Becky, who brings nearly 30 years of experience to the position. She was previously news director of KGAN, KFXA, and senior director of information content at the Gazette Company and KCRG TV9. And for those of you who have not met Becky, I hope we get an opportunity to introduce you to her over the coming weeks and months. And then I also wanted to mention that the CBJ is launching a new website in the second quarter of 2021. In addition to reading all of the latest corridor business news in the print edition, members will be able to read and share articles online. Again, that's coming out in the second quarter, and really excited about that. Okay, let's dive into the program. It's my pleasure to invite Todd Wishman up to the podium to introduce our keynote speaker. Todd is the Eastern Iowa Market President for Bankers Trust, where he's responsible for managing and growing the bank's commercial business in Cedar Rapids in Eastern Iowa. He has more than 25 years of commercial banking experience. Besides running Bankers Trust, Todd serves on the board for Junior Achievement of Eastern Iowa and the Eastern Iowa Health Center. He is a member of the Economic Alliance's Large Investor Council and is active in the Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary and his church and his children's various activities. Please help me welcome Todd Wishman up to the podium.
Thank you, John, and thanks once again to everyone at the Corridor Business Journal for planning this respected event. Bankers Trust is proud to sponsor today's luncheon, and it's truly my honor to be here today to welcome all of you and to introduce our keynote speaker. When I welcomed attendees to this event last year, like all of you, I had no idea we were about to enter a global pandemic. I had no idea that later in the year we'd experience a derecho, a word I didn't even know existed. What I did know, however, is that communities in Eastern Iowa and their residents had, time and again, overcome challenges and emerged stronger each time. When I reflect on 2020 and what our community has dealt with, two words keep coming to mind: adaptability and resilience. Early on in the pandemic, Eastern Iowa communities, businesses, and families had to adapt, and we did so in stride. And when the derecho tore through Cedar Rapids, we stepped up to help our neighbors and displayed great resiliency in our shared commitment to rebuild. Adaptability was also a theme at Bankers Trust in 2020. We adapted to the needs of our customers by turning our attention to the Paycheck Protection Program. We quickly trained our team members on the new program and began accepting applications as soon as we could. I'm proud to report we were able to process 996 PPP loans for $316 million, which helped save more than 25,000 jobs. We also adapted our retail banking model to keep our customers' employees safe by offering customers more ways to bank from home and through our drive-thrus. As our community works to distribute the vaccine and we move closer to recovery from the pandemic, I know we'll continue to adapt and be resilient. When I look at projections for later this year, I'm hopeful we'll be able to gather again as a community, and I believe we'll see a nice economic recovery. I look forward to hearing more on the economy from Gary and our panelists today, and I also look forward to being here again in 6 months for the mid-year economic review to see just how far we've come. So again, thanks to John and everyone at the Corridor Business Journal for hosting this important economic forecast. It's now my sincere pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Gary Huffbauer, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Mr. Huffbauer is a non-resident Senior Fellow with the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He was the Institute's Reginald Jones Senior Fellow from 1992 to 2018, and before that held leadership and research positions with the Council on Foreign Relations, Georgetown University, and the U.S. Treasury. He has written extensively on trade, investment, and tax issues, and today he is, fittingly, going to talk about what's ahead for the Biden administration and trade. Please help me welcome Gary Huffbauer.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. And Todd, thank you for that generous introduction, and John, for inviting me to this important event on an historic day. So my remarks are going to try to look at a crystal ball and say what's ahead for President Biden and trade policy. Of course, we think that presidents have a tremendous amount of power, and they do have a tremendous amount of power. But I want to start off by talking about some of the broad macroeconomic forces which determine trade flows and determine our trade balance. So looking at the export side of the U.S. economy, growth in major markets abroad, and for the United States, Canada and Mexico account for about 30%. Europe, China, Japan, Australia, rest of the world, the rest of it. The growth in those markets is really critical for our exports. The second critical feature for exports is the dollar exchange rate, the dollar relative to other currencies. Turning to the import side, the big macro driver is the U.S. gross domestic product growth. And turning to the trade balance, which was a central focus of President Trump's trade policies, it's the domestic savings investment balance, savings including what the government saves or doesn't save, investment, what private firms and households invest in all kinds of projects. That is the big determinant, not really the president's rhetoric or what he wishes. The final point I want to make before turning to the chart is that while political rhetoric tries to tell us that by turning the dials on trade policy, we can, the United States could greatly increase employment, particularly in manufacturing, or raise the general wage level. The truth is that the connections between trade and employment and wages, they exist, but they're not strong. They're weak. They're much weaker than the political rhetoric. So now let's look at some of the charts, starting with figure 1. The blue line in this chart shows what happened to economic output in 2020, 2019, and then coming to the 2020 pandemic worldwide. The economic output in the so-called G20 countries, that's the largest countries in the world, account for about 80% of world output and trade. You can see it dropped pretty sharply, which everyone knows, and then it's rebounded in the third quarter. That's the blue line. The red line is what happened to agricultural exports. Now, agriculture, of course, is essential to everyone to eat, to feed livestock, so forth. I mean, it is the essential part of any economy. Despite the drop, agriculture exports didn't drop very much. I mean, people still need to put on clothing, cotton and so forth, wool. They still need to eat, obviously. They may cut back a bit on meat, but agriculture exports from the United States didn't drop very much. And they revived in the third quarter, partly because some of our agricultural competitors weren't doing so well from a production standpoint. The gray or kind of greenish gray line is manufactured exports. And you can see how they really took a dive because they are very responsive to the business cycle abroad. So that's the export side. And what happens in foreign markets determines a lot on our exports in any given year. Let's now look at the exchange rates. This is a kind of a dot diagram. And of course, the dots are spread all over. But the big point I want to make is the downward slope in the dots as the trade-weighted dollar index gets stronger. In other words, as the dollar rises relative to foreign currencies, trade-weighted. So Canada counts a lot more than Australia, for example, because we have much more trade with Canada than Australia. And so going to the right, the dollar is getting stronger. Going to the left, it's getting weaker. And there's a plot over many years, quarter by quarter. First of all, let's focus on the red dots. Those are the agricultural price indexes. And what you can see is that exchange rates matter for agricultural prices. When the dollar is strong, agricultural prices tend to drop. When the dollar is weak, as it has been lately, agricultural prices tend to rise in dollar terms. The blue dots are U.S. manufactured exports with a 2-quarter lag because the exchange rate takes time to work through to affect manufactured exports, you know, in terms of the shipments and in terms of orders. So prices move very quickly, as we know from the stock market and agricultural prices. Volume of exports changes more slowly. But again, you can see this downward drift in manufactured exports. The dots kind of drift down as, you know, the dollar gets stronger, and they increase as the dollar gets weaker. So that's the picture. Those are the two big macro drivers on exports, and that's true whoever is in the White House. Let's turn now to the import side. And here the story is U.S. gross domestic product growth. When we're strong, when our economy is doing well, as it did up until January 2020, you know, we buy a lot from foreign countries. And when our economy doesn't do so well, we don't buy so much. And that's, I guess, kind of obvious, and the dots show that. Now let's finally turn to the trade balance, which was a political objective of President Trump. The blue lines show the borrowing from abroad, and that would include bank lending from abroad. It would include foreigners purchasing U.S. shares. It would include foreign direct investment in the United States. The flows both are flows to other countries and their flows to us, and the blue line is the net, and we're borrowing from abroad. And the red line is our trade balance, and it's negative. Basically, when the trade balance is negative, we borrow more from abroad. That reflects this kind of broad savings investment balance in the U.S. And unless that changes, the trade balance is going to be negative. That was a big worry for President Trump, and probably still is, even in retirement. But it's not a big worry for economists who think that the U.S. trade deficit is not a major feature which should be targeted by economic policy. Now let's turn to the political picture going forward, and let me start by saying that, well, presidents really have only a modest amount of effect on these macro drivers, and their main effect is through the budget balance, and then what the Federal Reserve does on interest rates and monetary policy. Those are hard to change. They do change. Presidents have some effect on them. But presidential policy on trade, it affects it at the margin, and basically it affects it by either enlarging the amount of trade that the U.S. does with the world, both exports and imports, or flattening it out, retarding the globalization process. And during the Trump administration, that's what happened. He wasn't a big champion of trade. But if you go back to the presidents from Truman to Obama, they were generally, their policies were on the globalization agenda, and U.S. trade with the world increased very substantially as a portion of our gross domestic product. When I started in the business back in the 1960s, we had about 12% of our economy was either exports or imports, and now it's about 25 to 30%. So that's a big change over 60 years, and reflects the policies of our many presidents, and also policies abroad which have been pro-globalization. Now, President Biden has said that he wants to focus on domestic issues in his campaign and in the statements that have come since he was elected. And that's his focus: the pandemic, infrastructure, the stimulus program, the 1.9 trillion stimulus program. But there are trade issues that will require his attention. And of course, the president can do many things at any one time. And I've ticked off here some of the big items that, he can't duck. He doesn't want to expend maybe a lot of political energy, political capital with his congressional allies to deal with them. Some he can deal with by executive orders. Some will require congressional engagement, and that's a precious commodity for any president, particularly this president with a 50-50 vote in the Senate and Vice President Harris having the deciding vote. But you can see all these items that are just very much on the front of the plate. These tariffs on steel and aluminum that President Trump put on really irritated our military allies. That would be Canada, Europe, Japan. The digital services tax is a big battle where foreign countries are trying to tax in I think a discriminatory fashion U.S. tech giants. We have this Boeing Airbus battle, which has been going on for since 2004, so 16 years. And both Europe and the U.S. have retaliatory tariffs against each other. We have the possibility of a U.S.-UK free trade agreement. We have the expiration of Trade Promotion Authority on July 1st. To renew that will require the president to lobby the Congress. That's a very always a difficult thing to get enacted, but without that, the president cannot engage in trade agreements with any other country. And then we have the World Trade Organization, which is in disarray at the moment. And above all these things, we have the U.S.-China trade, tech, and investment relations, which are in a very adversarial mood at the moment. And it's a huge amount of trade. Two-way trade is in the 500 billion range. So this is a big part of our world commerce, a big part of China's commerce. So let's turn to the next slide. I've tried to outline the box that any president, including President Biden, is in. He's got domestic political constraints, and then he has international realities. And the domestic political constraints that face President Biden are that his progressive Democrats, that would be led by Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, and others as well, Senator Brown, they really don't believe in trade liberalization, which has been the goal of trade policy up through, as I said, President Obama. They think that should take a second place, and that the goal of trade policy should not be to make goods cheaper for American consumers and American business, but rather to protect jobs where they're threatened, and to advance labor, environmental, and human rights. And that's new. I mean, that's not new in their agenda, but it's new as a policy objective in the Biden administration, which has been clearly expressed by Catherine Tai, the new U.S. trade representative to replace Robert Lighthizer. And then we have the China hawks in both parties. 70% of Americans now see China as an adversary, and there are strong views in both parties that trade policy should fortify, should strengthen the tech and investment and trade barriers that President Trump put in place. So those are domestic realities or domestic constraints. But then we have the international realities, and the big international reality is that our allies, and here I'm speaking really in military allies, Europe, Canada, Japan, and others, South Korea, Australia, they have strongly urged Biden to reverse the Trump tariffs on goods that affect their exports and threaten tariffs. So they really want a different tariff policy, at least with respect to their exports. And these allies all have a lot of trade with China. They have their own disagreements with China, particularly Australia at the moment. But they don't have much appetite for a broad new coalition against China across a whole range of geopolitical, trade, investment, financial issues. And meanwhile, China has gained in the last 4 years geopolitical ground with its trade and investment liberalization, which is quite extensive. And now it's vaccine diplomacy, where it's offering a vaccine, which is not as effective as what Pfizer or Moderna may have, but is maybe 70% effective, and they're offering it at low price or free to many developing countries. So those are the polls that President Biden, his trade advisor, Tai, his Secretary of State, Blinken, his National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. That's the balance that they'll be playing within over the next 4 years. Now turning to some guesses, speculation. My guess is that despite what I said at the beginning of these remarks, as to the realities of employment and wages, the trade agenda will have the headline of being a tonic for employment and wages. That will be the advertisement, the sticker, whether it is or not. I think that President Biden will compromise on these so-called national security tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs that particularly affect Europe, and the World Trade Organization, which is now in a funk, and make peace on these issues with allies and with the World Trade Organization more broadly. And he has said that he's going to issue an executive order, and maybe while we're meeting, he has already issued it. He's going to broaden the scope of Buy America. He's not going to liberalize imports of steel or other sensitive imports. He's going to give organized labor a pretty big voice in any new trade agreements or big changes in trade policy. I don't think he will escalate tariffs, technology limitations, or financial or investment barriers with respect to China. But I think he will condition any de-escalation on what China does in Hong Kong, on rights, on broader labor rights within China, on Uyghur rights. He will want to get something for any de-escalation from the Trump agenda in terms of all the barriers we have put in place, the United States has put in place against commerce with China. And mindful of these geopolitics, of course, he'll try to seek an alliance to try to find some common ground with Europe and Japan and South Korea and Australia on disputes that we have with China. And he might, not this year, not in 2021, but possibly in 2022, revive U.S. membership in the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership as a geopolitical counterpoint to China, which has its regional and comprehensive economic partnership with some overlapping countries and some different countries. So those are my guesses of the tone of the Biden trade policy in the next year or two. So finally, turning quickly to the bottom line and wrapping up, my crystal ball says that there'll be a major tone change, but not a wholesale reversal of Trump's protectionist and nationalist trade policies. Buy America certainly got a nationalist flavor to it, and both President Trump and President Biden are Buy America enthusiasts, despite the cost, which is extremely high per worker, per job saved. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars or higher. I think that the irritating Trump tariffs will be rescinded or softened, but on a case-by-case basis in exchange for concessions from other countries. I think that new trade deals will await 2022 with the possible exception, I would say just possible exception of a US-UK deal. If it's going to be wrapped up before Trade Promotion Authority expires in July, it has to be wrapped up very quickly. I don't see Biden spending energy on that, but I could be mistaken. And at best, I think relations with China will be testy. There'll be irritating issues, but maybe the administration will try to find, as as Blinken has said, try to find areas of compromise or cooperation with China, clearly on the climate and maybe other areas as well. So they may find some areas of cooperation, but if things go south in the South China Sea, for example, or Taiwan, or more repression in Hong Kong, then I think we can see even an increase in confrontation with China. So thank you very much, and I'll stop right there and take any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Gary. Can you hear me?
I can, very well.
Thank you. Gary, one question on agriculture. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see agriculture as a trade going in the next coming months and years?
Well, yes. Let me start by saying that agriculture always gets, high-profile attention in any trade talk. Agriculture is an important part of our exports, obviously, also imports, but it punches way above its weight in terms of the dollar volume. And so to me, that means that if Biden makes any concessions with China, part of what he will expect from China is, ramping up towards the so-called phase one targets on agricultural purchase from the U.S., getting rid of barriers which really predate President Trump on U.S. agricultural sales in China. And if he does anything with the United Kingdom in terms of a trade agreement, agriculture will be right there in terms of the so-called sanitary and phytosanitary barriers which the UK has against US agriculture. Not as bad perhaps as Europe, but they are severe. So yes, agriculture will get a lot of attention. Having said that, what happens to weather in places like Russia and Argentina and other producing countries may just overshadow whatever the president and his cabinet can do in trade policy.
Thank you, Gary. Another quick question on China. They came out with some recent growth numbers, and do you believe those numbers? And do you think that China, with its increased authoritarian approach to the economy, is going to impact its economy in the short run and the long run?
Yes. First of all, on the numbers, yes, China reported a 2% growth in 2020. I should correct myself slightly. The International Monetary Fund, using Chinese data and believing it, reported a 2% growth. China is the only major country to have grown in 2020, despite the pandemic. I believe that number because I am in contact with Chinese colleagues, and from what they tell me, the Chinese economy is really doing quite well. Both manufacturing doing extremely well, and consumers are out buying and so forth. So I think the numbers are credible. Now, and I think China will grow 4 or 5% here in 2021. It will do well. In terms of the authoritarian nature of the Xi Jinping range, well, President Xi came in with authoritarian instincts, and he has been given a gift, in a sense, by President Trump, because nothing like a foreign enemy to increase your grip on your own political system. And that's exactly what President Xi has done. He's gotten rid of some political rivals. He's ramped up the state-owned enterprises to a bigger role, much bigger role than they had when he took office, and extending political control over the whole economy. And I think that's just the way of the day. I don't see any moderation anytime quickly. Maybe he will reach a plateau. Market reforms would be good for China. And I think probably a part of his instinct is to go with market reforms, but political control is his dominant goal.
Okay, Gary, a quick last question. The Biden administration wants to have a stimulus of about $1.9 billion or trillion dollars. Can you talk about that? Is that too much? And when do you start becoming concerned with the level of our debt in our country?
Yes, well, that 1.9 trillion stimulus, I think he will manage to get it through the Congress, especially the Senate. Even though we have the 50-50 vote, he has Harris to vote to make the deciding vote. And he can do it through his so-called budget reconciliation process, which can be done once a year. And I think he will go all out. I mean, if there are two big agenda items for Trump, one is the pandemic, rolling out the vaccine just as quickly as possible, and two is the stimulus program, 1.9 trillion. He may trim it just a bit, especially if he can get a couple of Republican votes. He may trim it back to 1.7 trillion. I would be very surprised if it gets below 1.5 trillion. So I think that will come about, and that will be as a macro driver, the biggest thing that the president can do in terms of boosting the U.S. economy. There's a good probably 2% of growth coming out of that near $2 trillion program, accommodated by the Federal Reserve with its very low interest rates. Easy monetary policy that we've never seen in all of history. Now, when do we get to worry about the debt, which is now about 100% of U.S. Gross domestic product, the highest level since the Second World War? Well, the view I share with many economists is that the worry comes when we get inflation, if and when we get inflation. Right now, inflation is very well behaved, which means interest rates are low and will stay low. And the current consensus, which may be wrong, is that they will stay low, interest rates will stay low, inflation will stay moderate for at least the next 4 or 5 years during the Biden term. If that's right, I don't think the level of the new debt is a problem. When it becomes a problem is when we get inflation back, because then the payment of interest on the debt becomes much more of a fiscal burden than it is today. Now, having said that, which is kind of a semi-rosy scenario on the debt, let me caution that economists, and including bankers, no one forecasts that interest rates would be as low as they have been lately. Forecasting ability is not exactly perfect with either the weather or economics. And an old saying is that economists make astrologers look good. So we just have to watch it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gary. We appreciate you joining us from Taos, New Mexico, and stay well. And thanks again. Let's give Gary a quick round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving right along, we're very fortunate to have Jack Evans as our panel moderator again this year. Jack, of course, is with the Hall Perrine Foundation, a Cedar Rapids-based philanthropic corporation. Prior to assuming the role as chairman in 2018, Jack has served as president of the organization for 23 years. Over that time, the foundation distributed more than $115 million in grants to numerous local nonprofits. Please help me welcome Jack Evans to the podium, who I'll now turn the program over to.
Thanks, John. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I would like to lead off by introducing our panelists. To my right, your left, Joe Ammann. Joe is the Chief Executive Officer and President of Ammann Companies. Next to Joe is Jennifer Bennett. Jennifer is the President of Shive Hattery Architects and Engineers. Congratulations. Next to Jennifer is Mike Jardine. Mike is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Heartland Express. Welcome, Mike. And sitting to my left, your right, is Suresh Gunasekaran. Suresh is the Chief Executive Officer of the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, and a busy guy these days. Next to Suresh is Mike Ralston. Mike is the President of the Iowa Association of Business and Industry. Mike, it's great to have you here today. Welcome. We'll start alphabetically. Joe, could you reflect a bit on 2020 and what you see for 2021?
Sure. Sorry about that. Trying to get, he said close to the mouse, so I did, and it's a little too loud. So thanks. That's a good question. 2020 reflection, as everybody in the room can say, was quite a roller coaster ride. We started out the year with very strong workload, very strong models, very strong projections, and then very quickly, everything turned south. Fortunately, in our industry, I can share quite a spread of different sectors, one being our residential home design, single family, multifamily stuff. So In that area, that is the one that gets hit the first, usually when something massive or big like this happens. And as it has in the past, as suspected, housing and single family designs just went on hold immediately. So that was pretty devastating. Quickly followed by some commercial design work that was going on was put on hold. Fortunately, on our construction side, commercial construction side, we had a large backlog of projects, so we were able to work through that. And then on the real estate side, mainly commercial is what we do on real estate, was quite a challenge dealing with the fallout of COVID and businesses that were forced to close and then getting calls for not being able to pay rent and all those types of things. So that was a very challenging time. We were fortunate enough to be able to work with lenders, great local lenders, by the way, and work out opportunities that worked for us and the end tenants, whether it be residential or commercial, to get through, the first big wave, which I would say through August, September of 2020. And then, as we know, then August, this new term to ratio hit, and it's like a double whammy. So with over 50 some buildings that we had with some level of, damage or destruction from minor to very major, and we're still working through that. So 2020 in reflection was very challenging. Fortunately, to get to where we're at today, my big concern is moving forward is if there's any other long-term or even short-term mandatory shutdown of businesses and industries, that could be a devastating effect that the recovery for a lot of those small businesses may not be as fortunate as it was, in round one.
Thank you, Joe. Jennifer, could you briefly describe Shive Hattery and comment on your 2020, but more importantly, your outlook for 2021?
Sure. So Shive Hattery is a 425-person architecture and engineering firm. We are headquartered here in Cedar Rapids in the corridor. We've been here 100. We're celebrating our 126th year this year, but we have 11 offices throughout the Midwest. Our newest offices being in Madison, Wisconsin, and Lincoln and Omaha, Nebraska, and South Bend, Indiana. So we really saw 2020 hit our offices differently. We went into 2020 with just a record backlog and just looking like it was going to be our best year ever. And January and February certainly started off that way, exceeding even our own high expectations. And then the pandemic hit, and we saw our backlog drop almost immediately, 20-25%, as our clients put projects on hold or canceled them altogether, and then really stayed down low until this fall when we saw it start to rise. Now, it's been rising steadily every month, and we're looking at a very bright 2021. At least the first part of 2021 looks very, very good. So I think, the key for us is our diversity in markets. We did have some shining stars that will continue to be shining stars. Warehousing, e-commerce, our multifamily continue to do really well, probably because of the low interest rates. And we, education might still have a really rough 2021 as they're dealing with a dramatic drop in income, but we're seeing other sectors come back online and really looking for a bright 2021.
Thanks, Jennifer. Mike, truckers are a harbinger for an economy. With this in mind, what do you see for 2021?
Jack, we have been busier than we can ever imagine in the back half of 2020 and into 2021 as we go forward here. We can't haul any more loads. We got all that we can do. We had over 9,000 turndowns last week, which are loads that we turn down that we just simply don't have enough capacity for. So, it's a odd read on the economy. There are parts of this economy that are really suffering and hurting. If you're a restaurant, a bar, an airline, a rental car company, it's not good. But, our customers are like Georgia Pacific. They make toilet paper and paper towels. Clorox, they make hand wipes. You know, home improvement projects for the nation have gone through the roof. The amount of beer that is being consumed in America right now is up like 30%. So parts of this economy are going gangbusters, and there's other parts that are really suffering. But for the customers that we have and the end users that we serve, I don't see an end in sight. People are going to continue to consume and consume. Now you have all these people that are at home and they're working from home. And what else are they doing? They're online ordering stuff. So you got Amazon delivering stuff, you got FedEx delivering stuff. It's all got to move through the supply chain. It helps our company as well. So it's not going to let up. There's parts of this economy that are really strong that are going to carry the rest, I believe.
That turn down number again?
Over 9,000 loads in 1 week. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Suresh, could you comment on UIHC's vaccine situation today?
Sure. We have vaccine. We've been pretty successful at vaccinating our own employees. The healthcare workers represent the front lines, and we have about 10,000 workers, healthcare workers on the front lines at UIHC, and we've been through about 85 to 90% of them. And we anticipate concluding that this month. Our attention has really turned to what we've really wanted to focus on, which is patient vaccination. So we're working with Johnson County Public Health as well as the Iowa Department of Public Health statewide to make sure that as vaccination for patients open in Iowa, with a prioritization towards older individuals and those with pre-existing health conditions of significance, as well as frontline first responders and others. We want to make sure that we are prepared to be able to not only vaccinate, but what we've been trying to practice over this last month is vaccinating quickly. And so the experiments that we've been running operationally is how could we vaccinate thousands of people on a single day in order to support the community, support our businesses, and allow us to get back to a more normal society. So at this time, what we're looking towards is really the federal supply chain associated with vaccine availability. And probably the one alarming trend that we're seeing that's a little bit out of our control is just how much Iowa as a state is being allocated relative to other states. We know for a fact that we're in the bottom 10 states per capita that are getting doses right now. And so what we're trying to show is that this is a state that is prepared to vaccinate, and that the federal government should obviously consider that when making prioritization decisions. Obviously, there is a transfer of administrations today, and we'll be looking very, very eagerly at what the national response is in terms of vaccine. But at UI Healthcare, it's pretty simple. We intend to vaccinate as much as of our community and our region as we're allowed to, and stand at the ready to do so. If we receive the doses today, we'd be ready to start on Monday, and we could probably do several thousand a day. So that's really the goal of what we're focused on at UI Healthcare.
Thanks, Suresh. Mike, what are your members telling you about 2021?
Jack, they're telling us good things. They're pretty optimistic about 2021. We do a quarterly survey, and the survey we did in December for the first quarter of 2021 was very optimistic. By the way, we represent about 1,500 member companies across the state, manufacturers primarily, but others as well. And they all feel pretty good about the year. They expect sales to be up. They expect employment to be up. 70% of them are going to make capital expenditures. So that's a big deal. You know, a new piece of multi-million-dollar equipment, a plant expansion. So we don't know how long it's going to last, but for the first quarter or half of the year, people are pretty bullish.
Good. Thanks, Mike. Joe, what will the consequences be to the commercial real estate market given what happened last year in working from home?
Well, that's a great question. And you hear a lot of experts and you hear a lot of things on the news about how companies feel that their efficiency has either stayed the same or gone up by people working at home. I've got my own personal opinions. So what I talk about today is going to be my own personal opinions on that. And what I say when I've been saying this, people are inherently social individuals. We're social people, and sitting at home working in an office over time is not a good thing. It's a negative thing, and it affects people, how they think things are going on. Then they start to question whether they like their job or don't like their job, and we've seen a lot of people in our company and other companies that have hinted around looking for things because they're looking for something to make things feel better or different. So my opinion is the quicker we can get people back working together, I think is a great thing. And of course, we don't want that to happen today or tomorrow if possible, but that's not reality. Some things that have happened because we've been forced into it, like Zoom meetings, and like today we're having Zoom meetings. Some of those things are good, but I don't think they're the fix-all of everything. We have had numerous companies that are tenants of ours have contacted us to say, hey, we want to reduce our footprint by 50%. You know, what do we need to do that? Well, we've all entered into long-term leases. We've invested a bunch of money to make that happen. So the incentive for us to do that is really challenging, because if we do that, that creates a negative on our bottom line and impact with investors. And I try to caution companies from making too quick of a decision. And I've seen that happen in the past with trends in the industry, changing of office space to more open space and going to no office concepts and some of those things. And then a few years later, we're getting calls back because now we want to rebuild it and put things back in because it doesn't really work. So my comments are, let's take our time. Let's think about this. What the world looks like today. I mean, less than a year ago didn't look like it does today. So what do we know what it's going to look like a year from now or two? So instead of getting the cart ahead of the horse, let's be patient. Let's take our time. Let's work together and figure out other solutions. But in the long run, I know our company is very collaborative because we have many companies working together, and I assume most companies are that way. And I don't doubt that certain roles in companies can work fine in that situation. But again, for my opinion, getting back to work together is going to be good for all and everyone. And I think it helps companies in general, the individuals in general, and that's what we need to have to keep things moving forward.
Good, thanks, Joe. Jennifer, in terms of sustainability initiatives, how has that affected the projects you're working on?
Yeah, pretty huge impact. So, as we look at how we use our natural resources, our built world, our buildings and our infrastructure are one of our largest uses of our natural resources. So as architects and engineers, we are laser focused on that right now and consider ourselves stewards of our natural resources. So there's a lot of emphasis on sustainability right now, and that's really looking at that from the cradle to grave from the life of the project. Are we being responsible in how we're siting projects and how we're handling the water? Can we improve things through design and not harm, but can we really improve the water that's hitting our site and then leaving? And then the whole building system itself, just balancing all of those uses of resources over the life of the building, finishes, how it's heated and cooled, how it uses energy. Is it resilient? Is it cleanable? Is it, are we specifying finishes that will last? Are we designing and building buildings that will last, or are we still going to build these disposable buildings that we tear down after 20 years? So those are the things that are top of mind for us and big emphasis right now.
Good, thank you. Mike Hartland has always been at the cutting edge of technology. What's going on in trucking today?
There's all kinds of stuff, Jack. I mean, these manufacturers have made these trucks so much better in the last 5 years in terms of aerodynamics, in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of better fuel mileage. It's constantly evolving in the industry, and I give a lot of credit to the OEMs that are out there and the trucking companies that are really trying to get better. I mean, the trucks are so much better now than they were 5 years ago. It's not even close. Same thing with trailers. Same thing with tires. You know, the reason as well is it's all cost savings for truckers as well. So we want to have the best fuel mileage that we can. We don't want to be held back. You know, we want to have our speed correct. All of our trucks are governed at 64 miles an hour. You know, so we want to be as safe as we can. We want to be as efficient as we can, and we want to use the best technology that's out there because it's really better for everyone.
What fuel will power these?
Say again?
What fuel will power these?
For Class 8s, it's going to be diesel. It's the most efficient way to move Class 8s down the road. And for those who don't know what a Class 8, it's a big truck. Okay. Now, when we talk about little trucks, the FedEx trucks you see, the Amazon trucks, city trucks, all of these trucks that are smaller, certainly electric comes into the equation there and makes a lot of sense. Big trucks, however, are limited in the amount of weight that we can haul, right? So we can haul 80,000 pounds. Payload on that is about 45,000 pounds that we can actually put in the trailer. So if you load these big trucks up with batteries, they're very heavy, and that takes away from the payload that the customers are expecting to be able to move. So by doing that, you would actually put more trucks on the road to haul the same amount of freight, right? So that's an issue. But you know, if we can get smaller trucks to be able to move products like's happening now with electric or natural gas, that's a plus as well.
Got it. Thanks. Suresh, what's going on in terms of clinical trials at UIHC today?
I guess the latest is the Novavax trial that we're doing for COVID, but there's a whole array of clinical trials. Still, the largest hub of clinical trials for us is in cancer, both adult and pediatric. But across the gamut, you can obviously come to our website and see this. It's in moments like a pandemic that you value having access to the latest treatments. Obviously, the Pfizer vaccine that's being offered right now, the reason we know it's safe is because 200 Iowans went through the trial right here in Iowa City, and we had safety information a good 6 months ago on what it is and how it works. And so I think that one of the things that we have to continue to talk about is that it's fascinating to listen to Mike talk about the changes in technology with trucks. Well, it's medicine's moving at that same speed, and the speed at which something moves from trial to delivery you really see the spotlight on that right now during the pandemic because everyone's paying attention. But honestly, that's the way cancer care changes every single 5 years. There are radically different approaches. You may call it breast cancer, but there are multiple genes involved that can be isolated and different therapeutics that are targeted at that. So even what you think of as a common condition, the medicine on that is changing on a cutting edge these days. And we're really excited at expanding that platform at the university.
Thanks, Suresh. Mike, what are the top couple of legislative initiatives from the ABI for this year?
Jack, from our perspective, those kinds of things that enhance the state's infrastructure and enhance the state's workforce are the most important. The good news is legislators of both parties in both chambers are talking about expanding broadband. That's important for this state. And then there's also talk about putting more money into workforce training programs. And we think that's pretty important too. Those are the things we're focused on. It's been a little disappointing for us to see the focus on social issues as the session starts. And we're hopeful that there's a move to these business issues soon.
Good, thanks. Joe, you were one of the finalists a while ago on the First and First casino properties on the west side of Cedar Rapids. What's the latest on that endeavor?
Well, yeah, I can give an update on that, but let me give a little background on that first. The original proposal that was, the submittal date was the end of, I think it was end of February, last day of February of 2020. So we worked on that for months, preparing for that, submitted it, and then, everything fell off the cliff, So, and since then, the city is operational, but they still not really having meetings, and they're still not there. So the process got delayed because of that alone. Because normally what would happen, you'd have a submittal, they would meet, and then in a month they would make a selection and then move on, and then it would go to council, and then council would vote to accept, the recommendation of the developer, and then move forward to a developer's agreement, and then the process would start. So it was very delayed, and even getting the council to make that first step, which I think was planned originally in March, and I believe it was maybe May when that came around. And then, going through the process of, as the pandemic continued to worsen and the unknowns, we had several users and some big box users lined up that, we're constantly in contact with to see what the status is, and everybody's still hey, we're still a go, it just might be delayed, but we still want to be in the project too. As the summer wore down to, one of them said, yeah, it's just not going to, we're just have to pull out, we're not going to be viable. And then the ratio hit, and then with the city being as devastated with city projects and helping everything out, the whole process kind of got just put on hold again. So that took us through probably October, November. So the good news is, since then, we've been back working that very hard, not that we hadn't been in the background, and looking at retooling, based on some of the information we had. And the good thing with the city, and part of the RFP in this case was, we had asked that we had to make sure whatever we presented had incredible flexibility, because it's not a project you start and finish, in a year or two. I mean, it's a roughly 700 and some thousand square foot of buildings, including a couple ramps, and somewhere between 90 and $100 million investment. So it's not a small project, and it's going to take time. And that's what is great about our project, is it's very feasible. And because it's feasible, it's going to be very doable. Instead of having to build a project that you've seen in the paper in the past, there's a $50 or $100 million project going to be built, and it's going to be done in a year. Well, the market can't absorb that. So the good news is we've had this opportunity to look back at what we had presented, look at the market today, look at what we're seeing and hearing from interest from the community and around, and we've been retooling it. So I believe the project that the community and we'll see move forward is much better than the first one by a long shot. Part of the public request was to have something that's a public part of it. So we had a small pocket park and some other things, we could do different things. In the new concept, that's going to be expanded dramatically by changing some of the building designs and creating, as I dubbed, the central park area of the project that's going to stretch 2 city blocks, and all the buildings and residents and commercial users will be able to open up into that park. And then we're working to come up with a program with the city and some consultants they brought on board to how do we activate that park? How do we make that a something that is good for not only the people that live, work, and play there, but the general public. So I think in the very near future, that'll be back in the public eye, because we'll be resubmitting some of our changes to council here very soon. And the intent is to get all of the background stuff, development agreements worked out, and start scratching the surface here this fall. So we're excited to see that get moving forward.
Good, thanks. Jennifer, what are your staffing challenges this year?
Well, I think 2020, for the last several years, our biggest challenge has been attraction and retention of enough talent. And while that has kind of taken a back seat the last few months, I do believe 2021 will continue to see that. We just have been dealing with a shortage of architects and engineers in particular in the Midwest, and I believe we'll continue to see that. If you know of any electrical engineers, send them my way.
Got it. Mike, we've had a lot of talk about COVID today. How has Heartland dealt with protecting their drivers?
You know, when you think about a truck driver and what he does every week, Jack, you know, each day he drives 400 to 500 miles. He drives 200 to 2,500 miles a week. So that equates to about 8 or 10 hours of driving in the cab by himself. Then he sleeps 8 to 10 hours a day in the cab by himself, gives him 4 or 5 hours of free time. The shippers don't want anything to do with him. They don't want anybody on their property. They don't want to have any exposure to anybody else because of COVID, naturally. So what else does the driver do? He watches a movie in his truck, you know, maybe reads a book, goes for a walk, so on and so forth. So when you think about a truck driver, he's about the most isolated person that there is in our industry, other than somebody that's working at home. So the difficult part for managing our drivers has been what's going on at home. Oh, my wife has COVID. I think my kids are exposed. You know, Jackie next door might have it. You know, and so their need is they want to be home. They want to be there for their families, which is natural. But we got to move product. You know, they only make money by driving, and they want to be home. So they're torn back and forth. But really, their exposure has not been very much of an issue at all.
Thanks. Suresh, since you've been here, you've talked about an academic medical center being an economic partner. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. It may be surprising to some in the audience, but there's a certain number that the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics can expect in state support every year, and it's a number that's really easy to remember, and it's 0. That even though we are a part of the University of Iowa, and even though we are a state agency by statute, we receive no appropriations to run the hospitals and clinics. And so it runs as a business no different than any other business in our state, except for you get all the perks of being a state agency, of which I'm still waiting to find out the first one. We do have good football tickets, so I can't complain. But you know, what I would say is that what we see ourselves as is really a member of the business community, because I think that if you want to have a strong, vibrant business community, a strong educational system, and a strong healthcare system are something that you need to not only attract the right workforce, but then to retain that workforce. And so a healthcare system, a functioning healthcare system that's comprehensive for businesses to keep their employees healthy and to attract and retain that is something that's really important. And so one of the things that I always ask myself is, when we measure ourselves at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics, it isn't simply, did we advance the medicine of healthcare, which we do judge ourselves by. Sure, are we doing the right clinical trials? This vaccine effort and this research really validate most days. Why would you want a university medical center that's been doing research on coronaviruses, right? And then you come to find out that one of the 10 researchers that's been doing this for 3 decades is in Iowa City. That's the moment of an academic medical center. But on the other end of the spectrum, the real question is, what kind of business community do we have in Iowa? What kind of business community do we have in the corridor? And how much of an asset is UI hospitals and clinics in terms of providing the top-notch care that's necessary to support that kind of workforce and keep it healthy? And the way we measure ourselves is that if a business is considering expanding its operations here, or in Illinois, or in Minnesota, or in Wisconsin, or anywhere else in the Midwest, that we are hopefully an asset that convinces that business to continue to invest in Iowa and to continue to invest in the corridor. And so when you compare the level of healthcare that you can get here, we hope that we're kind of able to do that. And one part of that equation is whether we're able to do it affordably, because we know that a big part of the equation is not just is the care excellent, but is it affordable? And as all businesses are seeing this economic cycle, the question is what's going to happen with healthcare costs and what's going to happen with health insurance premiums. And something that we're very interested in at the university is making sure to work with a series of healthcare partners, other systems, private industry, to make sure that what we're doing is offering what patients want at a price that's affordable. And so those are some of the things that we think about when we think about the future of UI Healthcare.
Suresh, we had a question from the audience similar to what I just asked Mike, and that is, how is your staff holding up?
It hasn't been great. In truth, it's been a very, very difficult year emotionally for our staff. Workload wise, it's been a tough year. We've stayed pretty full. And so we've had this unique combination of, I already mentioned the famous amount of money that we get from the state. So we run as a business. And so when we have mandatory shutdowns, that's revenue that we don't make. And when we're overrun with COVID patients, it in fact is less profitable for us because we make more money on the non-COVID services than we do the COVID services. So we've had to do pay cuts and other financial things for our healthcare workers. So on the front lines, these workers that have had to show up every single day have also had to face economic hardship at the same time. There are a couple of things that have gotten them through it. So the first phase of the pandemic, they were able to get through it through the remarkable support of the community. All the talk about the heroes, all the talk about the yard signs, all the gratitude meant something to each and every one of our workers, and it really got us through it. The second phase, though, got tiring because the pandemic just took too long, and it continues to grate on people. And so the holiday season was really difficult because we stayed really busy during the Thanksgiving and the Christmas time. But there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And the vaccine has very much lifted everyone's spirits. They see that this pandemic can come to an end. And I think the only thing holding back our employees right now from really getting to a happier spot is the fact that we're not able to offer it to patients. I think that once we're able to offer the vaccines to large numbers of patients, I think the employee morale will come back up in the building. But I think that really we've seen too much death. I think that's the other side of it that we don't like to talk about and we don't want to see. And at the University of Iowa, we've been blessed. We haven't had as much of a mortality rate as some other places have had, but this is too much death. Too many people have been lost, and it has a definite impact on those caregivers that have had to watch it. At the university, we're used to winning most days. There's been a little bit less winning during the pandemic, and that takes a toll on the people that are doing it. But I want to thank the entire community. Overall, we're okay. We did sign up for this, even in a pandemic year. This is what we're supposed to be here for. Actually, the vast majority of COVID patients that we've seen at the university are not from Johnson County. So the vast majority have been here for the state of Iowa. And so I think that we're going to be fine in 2021, and we'll be a lot better off if the football season happens.
Thanks. Mike, could you talk a little bit about how ABI sees the economic development in a rural area versus a metropolitan area?
I will, Jack, but first two things. One, I forgot to mention before, childcare. We have a real issue in Iowa with quality, affordable childcare, and we're encouraged that the legislature and the governor see that as an issue that needs to be addressed. So that's positive. And second, before I go further, I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you to Suresh and everybody at the hospitals and clinics for all they've done. It's crazy. And Jack, you're right. At ABI, we think a lot about rural-urban issues because while we have great members in all of Iowa's urban communities, we have a ton of members in Iowa's rural communities. And the good news is things are changing. First, the legislature seems to understand that we can't always evenly split a limited supply of dollars between rural and urban areas. If we're going to make investments, we ought to make them where people are. But legislators see that we need to provide the same opportunity. That's one of the reasons this broadband expansion is getting a lot of traction. Maybe we need to spend traffic dollars in places like the corridor, but if we make sure all Iowans have opportunity to broadband, maybe they can provide their own economic future. So that's a positive. Secondly, I think business people for too long didn't think too much about this issue. And I'm going to give you two specific examples, and I'm going to name names of companies that understand how we all have to work together on this. There's a great company in North Iowa, in a little town called Sheffield, Suckup Manufacturing Company. And if you travel Iowa, you see their grain bins all over, you can't miss them. And for a long time, they had a real trouble attracting people to their little town. I mean, they employ 400 people, so that's a lot for a town of about 900. And so they got to attract from other places, but people didn't necessarily want to always come to Sheffield. So now they've worked with people in Mason City, and Mason City may not be Manhattan, but it's bigger than Sheffield. And so they've been able to attract people to that area. Same thing here closer to the corridor in Muscatine with a great global company like H&I Corporation, global leader in office furniture and so many other things. They have a number of their executives that live here in Iowa City because they like the attractions that are here, certainly Big Ten sports, but Hampshire and the things that go on there. And so I think people are understanding this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game and they can work better. And that wasn't always the case, so that's positive.
Good. Well, let's congratulate our panelists, and Suresh, you're well-deserved on that applause. Thank you.
Let me give Jack a round of applause as well, please. Okay, just a couple quick final comments here. I'd like to thank Gary Huffbauer again for sharing his time and expertise with us. I'd like to thank our sponsors once again, Bankers Trust, Kirkwood Community College, the Eastern Iowa Airport, UFG Insurance, ITC Midwest, CLA, Marco, and Aman Companies. Help me give them a round of applause. Next year's Economic Forecast Luncheon is tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, January 26, 2022. So you might want to put that on your calendar now. But I did want to mention a couple upcoming CBJ events that you might also want to put on your calendar. Coming up on February 12th, we will host our annual Healthcare Summit as a free live stream. The theme for this year's event is Finishing the Fight, What's Next for COVID-19 and Our Community. Dr. Robert Pearl, the former CEO of the Permanente Medical Group, will kick off the morning with a keynote address. And then following his remarks, we have all of the hospital CEOs in the corridor who will discuss the challenges and opportunities for their institutions in light of the pandemic. And there's more information on the back of your program for that event. And then looking out a little bit further, we will host our fifth annual mid-year economic review event coming up on June 22nd. This event will examine how the economy has changed in the first 6 months of the year. And obviously the economy has been very tumultuous over the last X number of months. So that will probably be one you'll want to put on your calendar as well. You can find out more information on all of our events on our website at corridorbusiness.com/events. I want to thank all of you for joining us either in person or virtually today. And I ask you to keep reading the weekly Corridor Business Journal, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.